Hey guys, Aaron Cybertron Zheng here, and today I'm bringing you an analysis on the team that I used at the 2015 Pokemon Video Game World Championships last month in Boston. I featured this team a bunch on Road to Ranked in the last couple of weeks, and that's because I wanted to show you guys really how it plays out and some of the strategies involved in it before actually delving into the movesets and strategies. In this analysis, I'll be covering all individual Pokemon EV spreads, movesets, items, etc., as well as telling you guys how I ended up building this team and why I ultimately brought it to Worlds. So I hope you guys enjoyed this analysis. As always, leave a like if you did, and let's get right into it. So going into Worlds, I definitely had a pretty successful 2015 season. Coming off a top 4 finish at US Nationals, I was rated second in terms of championship points in North America. And so going into Worlds, I definitely felt pretty comfortable in terms of best of 3 play, since Nationals was all best of 3. With that, I wanted to build a team that had multiple options, as you always really want to do for best of 3, but I also really wanted to limit my opponent's options, so had to do some thinking on what team could allow me to do that. I definitely didn't want to play any mirror matches in general, especially because I figured most of the Japanese players would be bringing the common Kangaskhan, Landorus, Thundurus core, as well as Cresselia, Heatran, Amoonguss, etc. And those Pokemon I weren't too great with using, I felt like. The majority of the 2015 season, I used Mega Salamence and Mega Venusaur, so Mega Kangaskhan, not a Pokemon that I personally had used too much, and I felt like the Japanese players were probably better than me in terms of using that, and I really didn't feel comfortable with the mirror matches, especially with Thundurus and Landorus as well. So I opted to try to see something different that fit towards my playstyle. I used Trick Room both at Worlds in 2013 and 2014. In 2013, I finished with a 5-1 record in Swiss and moved on to top 8 and ended up finishing 3rd. 2014, unfortunately, I missed out on the top 8 by 1 game, but still finished with a 4-2 record. So had a pretty decent track record with Trick Room at Worlds, going 9-3 in the Swiss rounds, and I figured it'd definitely be a good strategy to revisit in 2015. I also really was looking for hard counters to have for the most common Pokemon, like the aforementioned Kangaskhan, Thundurus, and Landorus, so definitely try to do some thinking in terms of what would counter those Pokemon. So when it came to actually building the team, I first looked at my favorite Mega Evolution of the year, Mega Salamence, and the reason I like it so much is because of its speed, ability to intimidate and outspeed Kangaskhan, Charizard, and Gardevoir is all pretty huge. And then I really liked GOTHITELLE as well. Earlier I mentioned that I was looking for a way to really limit my opponent's options, and Shadow Tag is an amazing ability. I used GOTHITELLE at the 2014 World Championships, and after Worlds I won a regional championship with it as well, so I felt pretty comfortable using it in the past, and hilariously enough, Salamence was on my original Worlds team from last year as well, so figured that would be a really great place to start. So then I did some testing around GOTHITELLE, and the first thing I actually added was Calm Mind SYLVEON, which I actually lost to at this year's National Championships on Angel Miranda's team. It's super strong, especially against special type attackers that don't do very much against it. For example, electric types like Rotom Wash, Thundurus, and Zapdos, and then your bulkier special type attackers like Cresselia and even opposing Sylveon. So paired with GOTHITELLE's Trap, there are a lot of practice games where I'd be able to lock in my opponent's 2 special type attackers, get a couple Calm Minds up, and then just sweep away. I think 1 or 2 episodes of Road to Ranked really demonstrated the ability to pull this off. Steel types were a major issue then to my core of Goth, Salamence, and Sylveon, so I added BLAZIKEN, which really can effectively one-hit KO Pokemon like Aegislash and Heatran. And then I looked at US Nationals, and I looked at what Pokemon I had a lot of trouble facing against, and FERROTHORN was one of the biggest issues there. Even though I was able to win against teams that had FERROTHORN, a lot of teams just didn't have any reliable answers to it, or maybe one reliable answer to it, but once they lost that answer, FERROTHORN would be able to really pull through. So I really wanted to try out FERROTHORN, and it was actually on my Worlds team along with GOTHITELLE and Salamence last year as well, so felt pretty comfortable with that. For the last Pokemon, I definitely wanted a bulky water type, to really complete the type synergy, and water is really important, I think, as a typing in general. So I, considered a bunch of things. Rotom Wash is obviously my first go-to. Ultimately, I actually decided on Assault Vest Swampert, and that's because it has a really good matchup against Aegislash, and people were running faster Aegislash when it came to Worlds, so they would outspeed Swampert, and then Swampert could just KO them with the Earth Power, and Shadow Ball wouldn't even do more than a third of health to Swampert, so that was really great. I ended up deciding on Swampert over Gastron mainly because I had some issues with Charizard, so with Trick Room I could just Helping Hand Rock Slide or Rock Slide Psychic to pick up the knockout, whereas Gastrodon didn't have as great answers. So let's get into the actual team. First Pokemon to start off with is Mega Salamence, and this one is pretty different from the one that I finished top 4 at with US Nationals. At Nationals, I brought a naive version, so opting for max speed, I think 212 special attack EVs and 44 attack EVs. This time I opted for a physical variant with Double Edge and Earthquake running max attack and max speed, admin nature as well, and then Draco Meteor to cover those dragon types that don't have any investment because I can still pick up the knockout. So I ended up going for this Salamence because I wanted to just hit as hard as possible. Very few Pokemon in the format can really take a max attack Double Edge from Salamence, and pair that with Helping Hand from GOTHITELLE, and suddenly you're picking up knockouts on almost everything. And I figured speed wasn't that important. For example, if I ran into the mirror match with Mega Salamence, I could Trick Room and then just Draco Meteor, and there weren't many Pokemon that naturally outspeed Mega Salamence, even if it's admin nature. So I opted to go for, higher damage output, and it was really helpful. I ended up going for Earthquake as my last attacking move because Heatran was kind of an issue, and I could catch Aegislash off guard if they decided to not King Shield, and that actually helped me in one of my games at Worlds. So definitely really enjoyed the set, and this is basically sheer offense, but super powerful against the right Pokemon. Next Pokemon, of course, is Gothitelle. Gothitelle I brought to Worlds last year was 252 HP, 244 special defense, and at that time it was to survive Choice Specs, Hydreigon's Dark Pulse, but this time I just maxed out the special defense because if you actually have 244, Life Orb Aegislash has a chance to knock you out without a critical hit, so I decided to go for max investment to survive that 100% of the time, if you're not getting crit, of course. I opted for a Calm Nature. I didn't feel the need for Sassy. There wasn't anything in that speed tier where I felt like I needed to outspeed or outslow with Trick Room. Citrus Berry this time over the Chesto Berry last year because I really want to protect on this one. And last year I ran a moveset of Trick Room, Psychic, or Psyshock I believe, Heal Pulse, and Rest with Chesto Berry, but this year I opted for Helping Hand, Protect. Helping Hand is one of the moves that it got from tutor moves, so it wasn't allowed that last year, and Heal Pulse really situational, whereas Helping Hand supports anything Gothitelle's paired with, and that made Gothitelle so much more fun to play with because it would allow moves to turn into knockouts, especially, for example, Double Edge from Salamence, Hyper Voice from Sylveon, etc. Moving on, we have Sylveon. So this one is a modified EV spray of the one Angel Miranda earlier I mentioned used at US Nationals, and this Sylveon, ended up being kind of unique. I opted for a moveset of Calm Mind, Hyper Voice, HP Ground, and Rest, and a lot of people are probably curious as to why I ended up deciding on Rest, but the main reason is you'd imagine with Gothitelle and with Sylveon I would be able to maybe get a Calm Mind up, and then I'd be at pretty low HP because Sylveon, being as slow as it is, would take some damage. So then I'd be able to maybe set up a Trick Room Gothitelle, Sylveon would be able to rest, and then suddenly my opponent's staring down a +1 special attack and special defense Sylveon. Sometimes I'd even be able to get a second boost up if my opponent was slower, even maybe a third boost up, and then the rest would be able to put me to the point where special type attacks really did nothing. There were a couple of good episodes of Road to Rank that seriously demonstrated this, especially against Pokemon like Mega Gardevoir and electric types. Opted for HP Ground as my last one because I didn't feel like I needed a Psychic type attack, and like I mentioned, Heatran and Fire types are kind of an issue. I could also catch Aegislash off guard if they decided to not King Shield, and that definitely came into effect as well. So super fun set. I wouldn't normally recommend Chesto Berry Sylveon, but combine that with Gothitelle and it made it a lot more potent in terms of a threat. The next Pokemon was Blaziken. So Blaziken's a super difficult Pokemon to use in VGC, even when you do have Gothitelle, but without Gothitelle, it's a lot of 50-50 positions where you're asking yourself, is my opponent going to switch out, or are they going to predict that and, just switch out to a Pokemon that can resist it? Because Blaziken's attacks really covered the entire spectrum of the format, and it was one of the, my best answers against the Cresselia, Heatran, Amoonguss, Landorus, Thundurus, Kangaskhan core, because of its ability to really threaten at least half that team immediately with a super effective attack. Of course, being as far as it is, it really wouldn't last long, and it's easily prone to getting Thunder Waved, which was actually one of my biggest issues at Worlds, dealing with a full paralysis. But otherwise, super powerful. With the naive nature, overheat, HPI, superpower, and life orb, you basically pick up knockouts on all the important Pokemon like Kangaskhan, Landorus, Amoonguss, Aegislash, etc. So super fun anti-metagame Pokemon. Difficult to use, but made sense with Gothitelle being able to trap your opponent in. A lot of positions I would be able to put myself into, for example, leading Blaziken and Gothitelle, catching my opponent leading Kangaskhan off guard, and then just double protecting and outspeeding and superpowering the following turn. Knocking out Kangaskhan also goes a long way for this team because it allows, for example, for Sylveon to set up a little bit better in the late game. Next Pokemon was Ferrothorn. Now, Ferrothorn's a Pokemon that I mentioned earlier. Had a lot of trouble with it, facing against it at US Nationals. Almost beat me in 2 of the sets that I played against, and I felt like a lot of teams were ill-prepared for it. Often teams either have just 1 or 2 Fire-type attacks or 1 or 2 Fire-type Pokemon, and I felt like I had a couple of good answers against Fire-type Pokemon, so if I could knock those Fire-type Pokemon out, Ferrothorn would be able to come in and really seal up the game. So Salamence being able to Double Edge and Earthquake really, cause issues against Fire-types, and then Swampert in the back as well. So I actually opted for Leftovers over Lumberry or Rocky Helmet because I felt like, I didn't really need the Rocky Helmet damage for Mega Kangaskhan calculations and whatnot, and Leftovers comes into effect every game. Whereas with Rocky Helmet, sure, it helps you out a little bit in games that have physical type attackers that are hitting Ferrothorn, mainly for those switch-ins, but Leftovers combined with Leech Seed can cause so much trouble against so many teams, especially against Cresselia, which I figured we'd see a decent amount of at Worlds. So opted for a pretty standard moveset of Leech Seed, Power Whip, and Gyro Ball, and a EV spread that allowed me to really dish out damage, take attacks, and basically have a combination of both bulk and offense. So really like Ferrothorn, and it's a Pokemon that I've used at Worlds both years as well in the last 2 years. And so to close things out, I ended up going for an Assault Vest Swampert as my last Pokemon. You see, it's actually pretty offensive, going for max special type or max special attack, really just going in terms of offense there with Scald, Ice Beam, Earth Power, and Rock Slide. So a lot of move diversity there, allowing me to hit a lot of the common Pokemon in the format for super effective damage, like Thundurus and Landorus especially, but also a Pokemon like Heatran. So I opted for the Assault Vest here just so Aegislash would be a bit easier to play against, so it'd be a 3-hit KO. Taking grass types with the Swampert is definitely still not fun, but you're not going to stay in on most grass types. And you want to knock them out with, for example, Pokemon like Salamence, which can KO grass type Pokemon and Pokemon that use grass type attacks. So ended up with 204 HP and 52 defense. Torrent, really fun nature actually, because after you fall under the Torrent range, a Scald does so much damage, especially with Helping Hand from Gothitelle. So really fun Pokemon to use here, and survived a lot. I think my opponents were often caught off guard, and it was one of the best counters to Aegislash that I could have. Super reliable too, as opposed to, say, Blaziken. So a lot of the times I would lead Swampert and Gothitelle and bait my opponent into attacking Goth and then just Earth Powering it, and my opponent wouldn't expect Earth Power to, first of all, come after Aegislash's attack, and then I'd be able to just pick up the knockout. So min speed was pretty important for this Swampert. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about my actual matches at Worlds to show you guys really what went on. So round 1, I played in one of the Italian players, and it was actually a super close set. Basically Thundurus did Thundurus things, and it ended up involving me having to outplay my opponent with my Swampert. So, I caught him off guard. He predicted Swampert to switch out to Protect, and so often didn't Solar Beam it. I got, huge Rock Slides off in the games, and ultimately, despite Thundurus really paralyzing everything, I was able to manage to escape with the win. So, did start off with a win in round 1. In round 2, I played Laios, who was the only non-Japanese player in top 8, and I actually ended up losing both games to him. Game 1 was super close. Basically, I felt like I had control of the match basically the entire time, but I definitely sacrificed Pokemon because we were making safe trade-offs, and ultimately in the end, I did not expect his Hydreigon to have Tailwind. So his Hydreigon set up Tailwind, and that made the end game a lot more difficult with my Blaziken. So it had to count down to whether I got a triple protect or a double protect off of Blaziken to beat his Landorus, and unfortunately I didn't get it. Game 2 was a bit more straightforward for him. He led, I believe, with Hydreigon and Gardevoir, switching the Hydreigon out into Landorus immediately, and my double edge from Salamence unfortunately wasn't enough to knock out his Gothitelle after the Intimidate. It's a damage roll depending on how Gardevoir is EV'd, but part of the reason, part of me wishes that I had Helping Hand on Sylveon, because that was definitely a predictable play, and I kind of just lost momentum from there. So that was one of the games where didn't think of the first turn very well at all, and I lost momentum instantly. So ended up losing both games to Laios, who obviously was an incredible player and made the top 8. Round 3, I played one of the Korean players, Lee Do-yeon. He was actually the only non-European player I faced. He had a pretty interesting team, especially with the Sableye, but it was a pretty back and forward set. I ended up losing game 2 because of a freeze, which lasted, I think, like 6 or 7 turns, but the wins were pretty straightforward, and Swampert definitely put in a lot of work in this one. Round 4 was against Eloy Han, who I actually played at Worlds back in 2012. He's from Germany. A super scary matchup in general, but I felt like I just played really well against him in this one, predicting his moves, predicting Trick Room on his side. Swampert was able to put in a lot of work against Heatran and Charizard. So, first 4 rounds at Worlds, that definitely went really well. well, and for the last 3 years I've come out of Worlds with a 3-1 record, but in 2013 I was able to win the last two. 2014 I lost the 5th round and won the 6th round, so pressure was definitely on from this point, and unfortunately things didn't go as well from here. Round 5, I played Italy's Alberto Gini, who's a fantastic player and the brother of Matteo Gini, who was a finalist back at Worlds in 2011. And normally this would be a really good matchup for me, but the Kangaskhan Thunderstanders Heatran I was really happy to see. Bisharp and Conkeldurr, however, made my job a lot more difficult. Conkeldurr here is super bulky, and normally my answer to Conkeldurr is SALAMENCE and SYLVEON, but SALAMENCE and SYLVEON weren't exactly the most amazing Pokemon in this matchup, and I had to play really carefully. In game 1, basically, was actually really frustrating for me because I took an early lead, and then late game I had Blaziken out, but I did not have Gothitelle to trap my opponent in, so I knew it Kangaskhan out, and I was so close to superpowering it, but instead I decided to protect to scout out whether he switched out or not. Ultimately he didn't switch out, and then he switched out the following turn, and then I lost Blaziken, and it wasn't able to really pick up the knockout that I was looking for it to, as he switched Kangaskhan out. So that was a really scary 50-50 misplay on my end there, and that's why I really rely on Gothitelle to pair up with Blaziken. And also the second game basically came down to a full paralysis. If my Blaziken could attack through the paralysis, superpower would have knocked out his Kangaskhan and won me the game. Unfortunately it was fully paralyzed, so I ended up dropping the second game, and Alberto took the set 2-0. And that was definitely a frustrating set for me, since I felt like I played decently for the majority of it, but a couple bad RNG rolls and one bad turn of prediction resulted in an 0-2 loss. But Alberto's an amazing player, and there's a reason why he's been at Worlds for so many years. So round 6 was pretty exciting, since I got to play Arashi Madi, who was the 2013 World Champion, and would have been the player I would have faced in the finals if I beat Ryosuke Kosuge in the semifinals. I think both of us were pretty upset with how we were doing at that point, being 3-2, so I don't think either of us played the set as well as we could have. Game 1 I was able to take, basically predicting, I think, a Heatran switch in, and I Earth Powered it, and I instantly picked up the knockout, but it was actually a really difficult matchup. His Reuniclus made things really difficult because he could reverse my Trick Room with Gothitelle, and if I led with Gothitelle, he could just attack around it, and I didn't have many answers offensively. His team was actually really cool because neither Charizard or Heatran carried Protect, something I didn't know until after Game 3 since it was such an offensive set. But it was really back and forth, and Charizard and Heatran definitely caused some issues, especially since I think I ended up not bringing Swampert one of the games when I really should have. So that ended up being a loss, all of the games being pretty darn close, coming down to predictions and whatnot. And to close things out, I played Florian Werdak, who is the Italy national champion. He's from Germany, one of my great friends from Europe, and super cool guy. He was running a pretty standard Mega Gardevoir team, and it was actually a really good set, but at that point I think both of us were pretty fatigued, and neither of us were playing probably as well as we could have been playing. So ultimately I finished with a 4-3 record of 28th place. Most of the losses I would look at, for example, against Laios, probably in the best of 3, just not adjusting well enough in game 2. Against Alberto, really not making a better read with Blaziken in that first loss, and in the second loss, it came down to full paralysis, but probably could have maintained the momentum a bit better earlier on. And then against Arashi, my third loss, ultimately I think actually just not bringing Swampert and not thinking about the lead matchups well enough going into game 3, so I felt like I didn't adjust too well in terms of the losses in best of 3, and normally I do a bit better in that, so a little bit frustrating, but I felt like I was still probably didn't have enough practice with the team, so I was getting adjusted to it as I was playing at Worlds, and that definitely was not helpful. So in terms of playing with the team, I think it's incredibly versatile from game to game. I think basically the most important question I always ask myself is Gothitelle actually worth bringing? Because it pairs up with really anything to put on pressure immediately if you lead with it. For example, Salamence and Gothitelle, Blaziken, and Gothitelle. It's also super important to fully utilize Salamence and Blaziken. For example, one of the reasons why I lost at Worlds against Laios was because my Salamence went down after turn 1, and against Alberto, Blaziken went down after not being able to predict the right Pokemon to come in here. So you really have to play smartly when it comes down to speed, because the team kind of ranges in speed. You have super fast Pokemon in Salamence and Blaziken, and then super slow Pokemon like Swampert and Ferrothorn. So you really have to make sure that you don't get caught to the point where your opponent's constantly outspeeding you or the other way around. So in terms of team issues, my main issue is, losing resources too quickly, like I mentioned earlier. Mega Kangaskhan, I had a bunch of answers to, but if I lost Salamence or Blaziken, Mega Kangaskhan can just, doesn't get intimidated, then can double edge the Sylveon or the Swampert and just do a lot of damage, while I wouldn't be able to retaliate with a knockout. Opposing speed control like Thunder Wave and Trick Room definitely caused me some issues at Worlds. Gothitelle becoming dead weight, just sitting there and not doing very much, was also a major issue. Offense being too slow, not enough damage output, and then Thundurus, obviously, just anytime Thundurus is a Pokemon you face against, you really have to get rid of it. If you don't KO it quickly enough, it can just spread havoc with Thunder Wave and Swagger, so not KOing Thundurus quickly enough as well. In terms of Pokemon issues, bulky fire types, like Arash's Charizard was actually easy to survive the Double Edge from my Salamence, which I was kind of surprised to see. So super bulky fire types could cause issues, especially if I wasn't effectively able to deal with them quickly enough. And then Pokemon like Bisharp, opposing Amoonguss could actually be kind of annoying too, despite me having Gothitelle and Ferrothorn and a Chesto user. Just getting put to sleep is always really annoying, so I'd have to play carefully around that. Bisharp, definitely really annoying. Alberto's Bisharp was not a fun Pokemon to see in Team Preview. So basically, in conclusion, I definitely wish I had a better finish at Worlds. The 28th is my worst finish actually basically ever, so pretty frustrating. I definitely was hoping to win it all this year, but one, I don't think I got enough practice with the team, which adjusted in me not adjusting very well in best of 3, and I definitely didn't play as well as I could have in the losses that I had. I really think that the team was a strong choice, but I was definitely hoping to play more Japanese and American players. I think for me, I built the team mainly to counter the common Japanese teams that we ended up seeing a lot of, but I actually didn't play any of those players. But your team at Worlds should be able to beat everyone, not just a certain group of players. So I definitely felt like I had the tools to beat the players that I faced against, but ultimately just didn't honestly play on my A game that day. And Pokemon's a game where you really need to play amazingly tournament day to end up winning. So definitely, some lessons learned from there. I would also probably make some minor adjustments. I think Helping Hand on Sylveon would actually be really cool. Maybe not even going for Chesto Berry. I think Sylveon on this team in general is pretty solid. So maybe Helping Hand, Hyper Voice, Quick Attack, Protect set, like the one that we saw Tony bring to the top 4. Just because that would pair off really, really nicely with Mega Salamence. Allow me to even attack and KO through Intimidate. So overall, it's a really, really fun team to play with. Didn't have an amazing finish at Worlds with it, but still went positive. I think I was like the 5th best American player there, and ultimately finished in the top 32 of the largest Worlds, but definitely looking to do better this season. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this one. This was a super fun team to make and use. I know a bunch of people question my decision to ultimately bring it and use it at Worlds. Some people even called it a joke team, but trust me, there's a lot of serious thought that went into the team creation, and I really tried to look at what I could use to end up winning at Worlds. But yeah, that's basically for this team analysis. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Check out the episodes of Road to Rank that featured this team, and I'll see you guys next time. Alright, peace.